Hi everyone, and welcome to this chapter of the Free Full Stack course. In this chapter, we're going to go ahead and set up an endpoint for our server using which our users can register a user with our service. Up to this point, what we've done so far is actually to create an admin or a super user, and we've created two endpoints, one for retrieving an access token together with a refresh token, and we've created an endpoint for actually refreshing our access token using our refresh token. So those two are going to be enough for people retrieving access tokens as long as they have already an account with our service. However, we don't yet have a way for people to make an API call, or not people, actually our clients, to make an API call and register a user with our service. If you remember, our users are basically based on email and password combination. So what we need to do in this particular chapter is to create an endpoint that allows users to send a an email and a password combination to us, and we're going to register those users in our database and just give them an OK acknowledgement, basically. This endpoint is not going to give users an access token. All it's going to do is either to register the user or just throw an error. So let's go ahead and start preparing for this. If we bring our Visual Studio Code in here, and I'm going to delete this shell, and let's bring it up. You can see it is sourcing it in our virtual environment. It's very important. So right now our application is not being executed. So if we go to our local host, the server is not running at the moment. However, we're going to start that soon, so don't worry about it. Now, let's have a look at the applications that we have in our Django backend. We have the backend, which is pretty much the root of our backend entire project. We have products, which has nothing to do really with users at the moment. And then we have users, but we also have another application here, which is called auth tokens. Now, if you say that the auth tokens application is only responsible for giving us an access token and a refresh token, then we shouldn't really try to do the registration with auth tokens. So auth tokens should have nothing to do with registration of a new user. However, we already have the users application, if you remember, which at the moment has no views. It only has a model, which is our custom user model, which we then went into settings py and registered as our custom user model right here. Okay. So that was just a little recap. It would be really good if we could go into users and register a new view and a serializer for when a new user is trying to register with our service. So let's go first and collapse users in here, and we go into our backend and into URLs. What we want to do is to go and say whoever types our server name and then /users, it should go into the users application. So let's copy this guy from here, okay? And then we go in here, and then we basically say users. And then we say it should go to the user's application to a file called URLs, okay? And we need to actually see that whether that file exists or not. Let's go in here into users, and at the moment there's no URLs py in the user's application, but we're going to create it soon. So back again in here inside backend URL, so we say users / go into our users application and also change the namespace to users, okay? And save this file. Good. Now, before we create the URLs py file inside the user's application, we need to talk about serializers and views in this case. So what we want is to create a custom view. Using this view, the user can hit our application and our endpoint, which is perhaps going to be called /users/register. And what we need to do in here is to grab some information from the user, meaning that by saying user, in this case, I mean by the client of our backend. So whoever's calling our backend, it needs to pass an email and 2 passwords. One password for the normal, basically password, and the other one is going to be the confirmation of the same password, just to ensure that people are typing their passwords correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead now in here and start working on a serializer. And this serializer, what it's going to do is it's literally going to take an object from the request, which is going to be an email. It's going to take the password 1 and password 2, and then it's going to basically make sure that the passwords are equal to each other. And then it's going to create a custom user in our database and save it. Okay, so that is going to be the job of the serializer. But the serializer alone is not going to be the entire endpoint. What we need to do is to create also a view that hooks the user's request into the serializer. But we'll take care of the view later. Let's just focus right now on the serializer. So let's go here into our users application and have a look if we have a serializer's py file in here. And we don't. So let's right click in here, say new file, and we say serializers.py. So in here, we need to start creating our serializer basically. Okay, so let's say that we have a class in here and we call it custom user register serializer, because we're going to register a user, and this name is completely up to us. It doesn't have to be named like this. Okay. And in here, we want to create a model serializer. Now, there are so many different serializers in Django and Django REST framework that I can't even name all of them. However, here, what we're going to do is to use the REST framework's serializers module. So let's say from REST framework, import serializers. And in here, in serializers, there is a serializer called model serializer. Okay, so that is the class that we're extending basically. Now I can see GitHub Copilot is giving me a lot of suggestions in here, but we're not gonna do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and define our fields one by one. We want an email field, a password, and a password to field. So let's first think about what the serializer is actually gonna serialize. Well, we need 3 fields, as I mentioned, from the user. One is email. So let's go ahead and first define what this email actually is. Okay, so let's say email is, it is coming from serializers, and it is an email field, as you can see in here. Okay, and we're gonna say it is required, true, and we also gonna put a validator on this. We haven't used validators before, however, we're gonna go ahead and do that for the first time. As you probably guessed from REST framework .validators, there is a unique validator. Okay, so we need to make sure that this email is actually unique amongst all the emails that are registered in our system. So I cannot register an email that someone else has already registered as a user. So then we say the field of validators here is equal to, then we say we are going to use the unique validator in here, and let's close this. And in here we say custom user. Okay, let's import this guy. Let's see if we can actually import custom user. It is we put it in users models, import custom user. Okay, so you can see how this is constructor. We say validators, we're using a unique validator, and its query set is equal to custom user objects all. So go ahead and read all the custom users in the system and ensure that this email is unique amongst all of those. Okay, now after defining email, we need to go ahead and define our password. So let's say password is equal to serializers, and it is a char field. All right, and let's close that. We need to ensure that password is write only, and so that you cannot basically read the password back using this serializer, because you see, when you register a user, you just want to okay the response as your endpoint response. So you don't, like, if I send my email and password to you to register a new user, you don't want to acknowledge the same thing back in a JSON response to me. Sending my own password back through the JSON response is very careless, and it is not very good. You should never send a user's password back as an acknowledgement of them registering with your service. If things go well, we just say 201 created, like an HTTP status of 201 or something. And if things don't go well, we can throw an exception or just throw some sort of an error, some sort of a server error. Okay, so we say the field of, if I can type, write only is true. So this is a property that we set on char field. Okay, And the other property is required. So we say true, it is an actual required property. And then we also need a validator for the password. So it needs to follow all the normal Django password validation rules, such as that it cannot be a very common password, such as QWERTY or password or admin or 123. So there is a good validator for that. So we can say from Django, contrib, I think, and then auth password validation, and we say import validate password. Okay, so you can see that this validate password is a function in here, and we can just close this. And let's go back in here and say that we have validators, okay, just an array of validators like this. And then we say we're using validate password as a function to validate this given password, okay? And you can actually have a look at the source code for this validate password in case you're interested in creating your own validators as well. So you can see it is just a function definition that takes an argument, okay, and just it starts validating your password for you. So you can go ahead and create another function that says my own validate password or something, which internally calls this one but adds some more rules. Okay, so I think it's always nice to have a look at the source code for open source software, such as what we're seeing in here, Django and Django REST framework. Now, we need to also tell our browser that this is a password field. If you remember, when we run our server, so if we say run server, oops, now we have an error, I believe, because we haven't really finished configuring our application. But let's go ahead into urls.py in our backend and comment this part out. Let's run the server then, so we don't have a problem. And then if I bring up a new window in here, let's say localhost, and we go in here, and let's then go into, we had auth, I believe, and then we had inside auth, you see. So this is our token obtain pair, our endpoint for retrieving an access token. So you can see email and password, it is understood to be a password field, meaning that its characters are not displayed in plain text. And this is exactly what we need to do in here. Even though we're working with a backend with endpoints, meaning that we're not working on a website. However, remember Django REST framework creates these endpoint HTML views for us automatically. Okay, so it is important that we tell it that this serializer that is going to be displayed then at the bottom of the screen needs to have the passwords displayed as a password. For an actual client, for instance, a Flutter client or a Rust client, this doesn't make any difference. This is mainly for Django REST framework to display these endpoint HTMLs to our end users for the purposes of testing. So let's say the style in here is, it takes a dictionary, and we say input type is password, as you can see in here, okay? And let me just stop the server because it is actually giving us errors, so it's not so important that it is running. Then after password, the last field that we have to define is password2. So let's say password2 is equal to serializer's char field again, okay, serializer's char field. And this time around, we're just gonna say that we don't have to have a specific validator on password2. All we want is for later to determine that password and password2 are actually equal to each other. So password2 doesn't have to have the same validate password validator in here, okay? So I'm gonna copy the write only and required and paste them right here, okay? So that's for password2. And also we need this particular style in here. So I'm gonna copy that and paste it right there. Good stuff. Now, remember, our serializers have to have actually, they don't have to, but it is good usually to have a meta class if we need them. And in this case, we actually need the meta class. And the meta class, remember, is going to associate the serializer with a specific model class. So we say model is the custom user, okay? And then which fields we're working with are fields, email, password, and password2. As you can see in here, okay? So these are the fields that we're working with according to our serializer. Very good. Now that we have the meta class, we have two functions to implement. One is the validate class and the other one is create class. So this is usually when you're working with model serializers in Django REST framework that you need to create these two. Actually, you don't need to, but you usually do, because if you've come so far to create a model serializer and all these special fields, in addition to your meta class, it is very likely that you're going to create these two functions, at least in my experience. So one is the validate function and the other one is the create function. The validate function, as its name indicates, is going to validate your input. Okay, so what we need to do in case of validation, custom validation, is just to ensure that the password and the password2 fields are equal to each other. Okay, so we don't have to actually validate the password that is being done by this. However, our custom validation has only to do with passwords being alike. Not alike, actually equal exactly. Okay, so let's say def validate. And you can see, actually, this was exactly what I was going to type. I'm really glad that GitHub Copilot is helping me so much. So it says we go ahead inside attributes in here and grab the password. And then we go and grab the password too and ensure that they're equal. If they're not equal, then we raise a validation error. Okay, and it is coming from serializers in here. You can see REST framework. Okay, and it has a validation error. You can see in here as a class. And it's good that you can see the source code for it. It's an API exception, so it actually returns a response, I believe, somewhere. Okay, let's see. Detail API exception. Somewhere in here, we're probably returning some sort of a response. Okay, get codes. Okay, but it's somewhere deep inside this code that I'm pretty. Oh, here's the HTTP status. That's really good. And then it's probably just returning just a string then in that case. Yeah, it is very possible that it's doing that. So some sort of a JSON response, okay? And then we return the attributes if the password and password2 do match. Good, now the validation is done. Let's actually bring a comma in there to get the formatting right. After validation is done, we need to go ahead and create the create function. It was a bad choice of words. We should go ahead and write the create function. So you can see that the header for the create function looks like this. It takes self because it's an instance method. And then you have your validated data because this data is passed to you after validate function has been called by Django. In this case, Django REST framework. Now, our job in here is to go ahead and create a user given this validated data. All right. So we say that we want a user variable, and it is a custom user. And we go into its objects and we create a user. Okay. Now, what we need to do in here is just to populate the email. And we say email is equal to validated data, and we grab the email from there. Okay, I can see GitHub Copilot is really trying so hard to set the password like this, but this is really, really bad. Now, you can never really set the password like GitHub Copilot was suggesting in here. And the reason behind that is that if you do that, actually, your password will be saved into your database in a plain text. So whatever password is inside this validated data is going to be saved directly into our database. And you would be like, okay, but what's wrong with that? Well, it is very wrong. You should never, ever store passwords in plain text into your database. So that's problem number one, is for security reasons. If anyone gets hold of your database and just does a simple select statement on your database, they can read all the user emails and passwords. So that's problem number one. And problem number two is that if you store a user's passwords in plain text into your database, even if you completely ignore all the security recommendations, user won't be able to log into your system, because Django by default, when it retrieves and when it receives an email and password combination and wants to call the login function to log that user in, there will be internal code inside Django and Django REST framework that takes the input password and then tries to encrypt that password, and then compare the encrypted password against your database. So if you store the user's password in plain text into your database, that user will never, ever be able to log into your system, because an encrypted password will never match the plain text password. It's almost impossible to do that. So instead of that, what we need to do is to call a special function on this user object called set password. So we say user, if I can spell, set password, okay? And then we take the validated data dictionary in here, and we extract the password from that dictionary, and we use this function to set the user's password. Okay, so this is an internal function on this custom user, which will then take the plain text password encrypted and then sets the encrypted password on that user object. All right. After changing this user, you need to also ensure that you're saving it into the database, because this creation already saves the user. However, now we're setting the password and we're not saving the user. So we should say user.save like this. And then of course we should return the user. Okay. So that's really all we have to do for our serializer. After the serializer is created, we need to go ahead and create a view for this guy, because the serializer just does the job of like storing this user into the database and then telling us that the user was created. However, someone somewhere has to take care of the endpoint itself. So in here, let's go into users application. We already have a file called views, but it is empty. So let's create a custom register view for our user. So we say class custom user register view, and this guy is going to be coming from a create API view, I would say. Let's go ahead and import that. So we're going to go ahead in, as you'd probably guess, we're going to render. I'm not sure if we need render. Let's remove that. So we say from REST framework, import generics. Okay. And then we say generics, create API view. All right. Now, this create API view, you need to read the documentations for it, but I will just tell you quickly how we can use it. There are three important properties that we have to set on it. One is the actual model that we're working with. So which object in our database should this view create? And the object is of course our custom user model. Okay, so custom user in here. Okay. However, I'll teach you now something that I've learned quite a while ago with Django, and that is you usually shouldn't go and refer to custom user or whichever object. Actually, no, not whichever object, specifically your custom users in your system. You should try to not to refer to them using just their class name. What you need to do is to use a special function called getUserModel, which is hooked to your settings py file in here. So when we go in settings py and store an auth user model like this, and we set that our entire application, our entire backend should use this user model as a custom user model, there is a function that you can use with Django which can extract this value from settings py and use it as a class name. Okay, and that is called getUserModel. So let's go in here and we say from Django contrib.auth import getUserModel like this, and in here we just call that function. We say getUserModel like this. Okay, so now this is hooked to our custom user without us having to import custom user manually. All right. After this model, we need to also say which serializer we're using. So we say serializer class. And in here, we should use our custom serializer, which is custom user register serializer. So let's just copy its name from here and paste it right there. And let's see if Visual Studio Code can help import it. There we go, from users.serializers, import custom user register serializer. Okay. And last but not least, we also need to tell Django REST framework which users are allowed to call this API endpoint. And in here, we're going to use permissions for the first time. So let's say from Django, I think it was, is it REST? I think it's REST framework permissions. Yes, from REST framework dot permissions. Import allow any, but I don't want to actually do it like this. I want to say from REST framework import permissions. Okay, because in here I want to go ahead and say permission classes is equal to an array, and in here I say permissions dot allow any. This is how I wanted to do that. Okay, so we say allow any user to call this API endpoint, and you can see there are other classes in here which we can use, and we are going to use some of these actually in the future, but not right now. So for now, we just say allow any user logged in or not logged in, basically, to call this API endpoint. All right. Now that that is done, what we need to do is to take care of the create function for this guy. Now, this is very important. This is one of the points a lot of people get confused with this type of view. You see, what we've done is that we've created a serializer that takes a username, an email, a password, and a password too, basically a password confirmation from the user. Now, if you just leave your view like this and go ahead and run your application and basically hook your URLs to this view, if you register a user, then our endpoint, which is this guy, after creating the user successfully, it will reply with a JSON back to you with the exact same information you passed it. It will reply back with the email, password, and password too. So imagine calling an endpoint to register a user, and then you actually get your user email, the password, and the password confirmation back in the response. And that is very insecure. It is not a good idea to do that, to send the password back through a JSON response, that anyone doing a man-in-the-middle attack on that endpoint will be able to get a hold of your email and password, basically. So what we need to do is to overwrite the create function on this particular class, and we tell it that we want to respond with just an HTTP status. Okay, so let's first go ahead and import our status we have in here, and we say we want to also import status in here, and then we say def create, and we have self, and we have request args, kw args, and I'm just going to remove all of this from here. Okay, so what we need to do is to first tell super, which is this guy, to do its work. We want to tell it to go ahead and create this user with this information. Okay, so let's say super like this, and then we say create. So do your creation, and then we want to respond with a REST framework response in here. So let's go ahead and import it. So we say from REST framework dot response, import just the response object in here. Then we say return a response. Did I write it correctly? Yes. And then the status is just going to be status dot HTTP 201 created. Okay, so this is the trick that you need to do in this type of serializer, to say that after creating this user object, please don't respond back with the same object that you just created. It is insecure. Just respond back with a 201 created or something like that. Okay, good. We're done with our serializers and views now. What we can do, or actually our serializer and view, because we have one serializer and one view, but their files are called serializers and views. Okay. Now, what we need to do as to glue everything together is, if you remember from our backend URLs in here, we are coming into users / into our users URL. However, inside users application itself in here, we don't have a URLs file. So let's go into our backend in here, take this URLs py file. I'm going to copy its contents. Then we're going to go into users, right click, new file, and we say urls.py. All right. And I'm going to paste the contents that were there. Then I'm going to clean everything from here, actually, like this. And then what we're going to do is, we need actually path, but we don't need include. So let's remove include. I wonder if we need admin. I don't think we need this either, to be honest. Then we say the path of /register, sorry, not /register, register /, because everything before that is handled in URLs inside the backend. So users / comes here, and then we say register /. So it will be like this, localhost 8000 /users /register, like this. Okay. And then we say, what we want to do in here is to go ahead to our custom user register view. So we say from users.views, import custom user register view. Then we say custom user register view. And remember, we have to call the as view function on it. Then for its name, we say it is register. Okay, so that's our endpoint. So let's put this to test. What I'm gonna do in here is I'm gonna create a new terminal window in here. Let's add some, actually let's increase the size in here, and let's say we go into Postgres, and then we say user is full stack course. And remember, by default, it's gonna connect to a database like this. I think we say T full stack course, or sorry, it's D probably, because, oops, let's see. I thought it was, oh, It is T probably. Okay, so I'm going to clean this and let's just say capital U because the user should be capital. Okay, so by default, by specifying the username like this, it is going to connect to a database with the same name. Oops. So if I quit in here and go ahead and say PSQL and user full stack course, you can do this at home as well. It is going to by default connect to your database. So if you say \C, you can see we're connected to a database called full stack course as the user full stack course, though we only specified our user in here. But that's the default behavior of PostgreSQL. All right. So let's go ahead in here and have a look at our tables. It looks a little bit strange in here just because I have a huge font, but there is a table in here which is called users custom user. So let's say select all, or for those of you who like to type your SQL statements with uppercase. So we say select all from this table, and you can see at the moment we only have one user. You can see one row. Okay, and that row should be the custom user that I have created. It is admin@admin.com, or we have created actually. Okay, so we have only one user. Now let's go to our server in here. I'm going to bring up a terminal window and then run server. Now, okay, namespace include without providing an app. Okay, this is really good. Now we got this error, and this is I'm so actually glad that we get these errors because then I can explain to you why we do things the way we do things. So if you go into urls.py, you can see in here, we're saying that we're going to users slash using the URLs of that user's application, and the namespace name should be called users. Then Django goes into the URLs file inside users application and it says, is the namespace users? And the way it does that is that it looks at a property called app name. Okay, if this property doesn't exist, then it will throw this error. It says specifying a namespace and include without providing an app name is not supported. So you need to put the app name equal to a value that you've specified in your URLs in here. Okay, so let's save this, and you can see now our server is up and running without a problem. So let's copy this URL and let's go into a window here. Oops. I pasted it in the wrong window. Here, not now, don't save anything. And then we say slash users, right? And then slash register, slash. Then you can see we come to custom user register. And what you can then see in here is that we have an email and 2 password fields. So let's test something. Let's try to register with a user, admin@admin, which we already have a user for, okay? Then it is being suggested some passwords by Safari by me, but you can just put any password in here. Then I'm going to press the post button. You can see, oops, email, this field must be unique. So this is this particular validator inside our serializer. So let's close this. You can see we said that it should be a unique email. So this went into the database and read all the users that are already in the database, and it understood that admin@admin.com already exists, so you cannot pass that again in here. So you get this particular error. Okay, so now let's go ahead and say admin2@admin.com. All right, and then for passwords, let's provide some really bad passwords in here. So we say choose my own password, okay, and then we say admin and then admin again. Then let's press the post button. And then you can see we get an error in here saying that the password is too short. And guess what? That is our own validator on password. Not our own, actually, the validator that the system provides, but we place it in here, okay? So that's what this validator is doing at the moment. So that seems to be working fine. Now let's test this logic in here, that the 2 passwords should be equal to each other. So let's go back in here, and then I'm gonna actually choose quite a good password. So I'm gonna say like hello world 123, and then hello world capital. Hello world 123, and then I'm gonna misspell the other part. So I'm just gonna make sure that these 2 passwords don't match each other. Okay, so we're not gonna get this error this time because this password is actually quite strong, but we're gonna get in here that the passwords don't match. So now we should get this particular error, passwords must match. Okay, and let's post, and now you can see we get this custom error in here with a 400 bat request, and you can see that we're getting a password validation failure, which is exactly this one. So this validation error is intentionally throwing a 400. Let's see if we can find, there we go, right there you can see that the status is actually 400. So I really suggest that you test these things out for yourself, and also try to have a look at the source codes for these things. I mean, Django and Django REST Framework are open source for a reason, so you don't have to always just rely on the documentation. Just have a look at the source codes. You can understand a lot as well from the source codes as well. Now, we've tested everything that was a negative case. Now let's test the positive case. So admin2, I'm going to go in here and actually ask the system to provide some sort of a strong password. So admin2, I hope that suggests a new password. Good. Then I'm going to press the post button, and there we go. Now this was successful and these fields were cleared. You can see we got a 201 status back, and that's our serializer doing, our view doing this 201, you can see. And it is not responding with the actual user that was created. And to confirm that things are working, let's go ahead and you can see here we had one user. And if I issue the same select statement, you can see now we have 2 rows in here. Okay, so one was the admin at admin.com, and the other one is admin2 at admin.com. And if we go into here and go into our admin Django administration panel, and try to log in with our admin user. I think it was admin at admin.com, and the password was admin as well. Let's log in, and then we go into our custom users, and now you can see that there are 2 users available in here. If you want to delete this user, which I completely understand, you can do that. But before we do that, let's see if this user can now actually retrieve an actual access token. Okay, so let's go into our backend in here, and then I'm gonna say /auth/ just like that. And let's say the email is admin2 at admin, and I'm gonna ask password to be filled by Safari, because Safari knows this password. I don't know the password really. Then I'm gonna post it, and you can see we actually retrieved an access token and a refresh token. So now if you want to delete that user, you can either do that through your admin interface, or you can just directly do it in the database. Okay, but I'm going to do it through the admin interface. I'm going to select this user, and then I'm going to say delete somehow, or let's go into the user. And then I think we can just say delete. Boom. Do you want to delete it? Yes, I'm sure. Now, if you go back here in Safari and try to retrieve an access token for this user who doesn't exist anymore, you can see like this, and then post, then you get no active account found with the given credentials. Okay, so that user doesn't exist anymore. And if we do a select statement in our database as well, we just get 1 row back. So huge congratulations. We're now done basically with this endpoint for registering. So now we have 3 endpoints in our system, I believe. One is if we say HTTP localhost 8000, we have users, we have users register. We have auth / and this basically does a login, right? And then we also have auth / refresh, okay, which does a refresh token. So now we have these 3 endpoints set up successfully in our application. Before we forget, let's go and stop the server, and we can then commit our code. So git stats, and we have these things changed in here. Git log, previous step was step 6. So let's say step 7 now. Git commit, step 7. Add register, or users / register / endpoint. Okay, just like that. And then we can push our changes. So congratulations again. Great job. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, and if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do. I'd really appreciate it. I know about 52% of people watching my videos haven't yet subscribed to my channel, which is a shame for me at least. So I'd really appreciate it if you could please go ahead and subscribe now. Again, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.